Sit back as we tell you the story of one of the most daring and consequential military operations in modern American history, a mission that ended the reign of the world's most wanted terrorist. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button because you won't want to miss stories like this. Imagine being in the White House Situation Room, watching live video feeds as 8 helicopters carrying elite soldiers fly hundreds of miles through hostile territory in the dead of night. Your target is the man responsible for unspeakable atrocities, the founder of ISIS, a terrorist who declared himself caliph and built an empire of death that stretched across 2 countries. He's killed Americans, burned people alive in cages, enslaved women and children, and inspired attacks around the world. For years he's been a ghost, always one step ahead, constantly moving, never using phones or computers that could give away his location. But tonight, October 26, 2019, that all ends. Tonight, Delta Force is going after Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. You're about to discover how years of painstaking intelligence work, international cooperation, and human courage came together in a 2-hour raid that changed the course of the war on terror. You'll learn how a defector from ISIS provided the breakthrough that led to Baghdadi's compound. You'll find out exactly what happened during those tense moments when American commandos breached the walls and chased the world's most wanted man into a tunnel. And you'll see why this operation, named for an American aid worker who suffered unimaginable cruelty at Baghdadi's hands, represents both a triumph and a reminder that the fight against terrorism is far from over. The problem was that finding Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was like hunting a ghost. He was paranoid, disciplined, and had spent years perfecting the art of staying hidden. After declaring himself caliph of the Islamic State in July 2014, Baghdadi had overseen a reign of terror that shocked the world. His forces controlled territory the size of the United Kingdom, spanning parts of Iraq and Syria. They murdered thousands of innocent civilians. They executed American journalists James Foley, Stephen Sotloff, and Peter Kassig, broadcasting their deaths to the world. They burned a Jordanian pilot alive in a cage. They enslaved Yazidi women and girls. They carried out the genocidal massacre of religious minorities. They inspired or directed terror attacks in Paris, Brussels, San Bernardino, Orlando, and dozens of other cities around the globe. Baghdadi was the architect of it all, a former teacher with a PhD in Islamic theology who had transformed himself into one of the most brutal terrorist leaders in history. But by early 2019, Baghdadi's caliphate was crumbling. Coalition forces led by the United States, working with Kurdish fighters on the ground, had been systematically destroying ISIS territory. In March 2019, ISIS lost its last territorial stronghold in Baghouz Faqani, Syria. The physical caliphate was gone. But Baghdadi himself remained free, and as long as he was alive, he remained a symbol, a rallying point for jihadists worldwide. The United States had a $25 million bounty on his head. Intelligence agencies around the world were hunting him, and for years they came up empty. Baghdadi moved constantly, rarely staying in one place for long. He avoided phones and computers. He used couriers to communicate. He trusted only a tiny inner circle. Every time American forces thought they had a lead, he would change his plans at the last minute and disappear. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Human intelligence, the oldest tool in the spy business. For all the satellites, drones, signals intelligence, and cutting-edge technology the United States possessed, it was people on the ground who finally cracked the case. According to officials, 2 key individuals captured in western Iraq gave up crucial information. One was the wife of a close Baghdadi aide. The other was a courier who worked for the ISIS leader. Under interrogation, they provided names, locations, and details about how Baghdadi moved through the desert regions along the Syrian-Iraqi border. But even more important was an ISIS defector who became an informant for Kurdish forces working with the Americans. This person had inside knowledge of Baghdadi's routines, his security measures, and his hiding places. The informant provided intelligence so detailed that it included a room-by-room description of the compound where Baghdadi was hiding, along with personal items that could be used for DNA verification. The CIA took this information and went to work. Using the names and locations provided by the captured wife and courier, CIA officers and Iraqi and Kurdish intelligence agents began recruiting sources along the routes Baghdadi traveled. They watched the patterns of his movement. They identified places he stopped, villages where he felt safe. They built a network of eyes on the ground piece by piece, until they had a clear picture of where he was and how he operated. Iraqi intelligence played a crucial role, with officials later stating they had been coordinating constantly with the CIA, providing valuable information about Baghdadi's movements and hiding places. The Kurds, through the Syrian Democratic Forces led by General Mazlum Abdi, spent 5 months gathering intelligence on Baghdadi's location. It was a montage of puzzle pieces from multiple intelligence agencies across several countries, all coming together to create a target. By October 2019, American intelligence had narrowed Baghdadi's location to a compound near the village of Barisha in northwestern Syria's Idlib province. This was an unusual location for the ISIS leader. Idlib was controlled by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, a jihadist group connected to al-Qaeda and hostile to ISIS. American officials were surprised that Baghdadi would hide in territory controlled by his enemies. But that might have been the point. Perhaps he thought no one would look for him there. Intelligence indicated he had been at the compound for a considerable period. Satellite surveillance and drones watched the location. Intelligence sources on the ground confirmed his presence. And crucially, they knew the compound had an underground tunnel system that Baghdadi could use to escape if attacked. President Donald Trump was briefed on the intelligence and presented with options. U.S. Special Operations Command had standing plans for targeting Baghdadi, some involving drone strikes, others relying on ground forces. Trump chose the ground option, giving Delta Force operators the mission to capture or kill the terrorist leader. The operation was given the code name Operation Kayla Mueller, named after a 26-year-old American aid worker who had been kidnapped by ISIS in August 2013 while doing humanitarian work in Syria. Kayla Mueller had been forced into marriage with Baghdadi, repeatedly raped and tortured by him over many months, before being killed in February 2015. Naming the operation after her sent a powerful message. America's memory is long, and justice, however delayed, will come. On Thursday, October 24th, intelligence officials informed Vice President Mike Pence that there was a high probability Baghdadi would be at the compound in Idlib. Time was critical. Baghdadi never stayed in one place for long, and if they didn't move quickly, he would disappear again. 2 or 3 previous attempts to get him had been called off at the last minute because he changed his travel plans. This time they couldn't afford to wait. On Friday, October 25th, General Kenneth McKenzie, head of U.S. Central Command, briefed Defense Secretary Mark Esper and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley on the intelligence and the operational plan. They gave their approval. Trump was briefed on all aspects of the plan and the risks involved. He gave the green light. At 9 o'clock Saturday morning, October 26th, McKenzie gave the order for the mission to begin. The raid force consisted of between 50 and 70 members of the Army's elite Delta Force, officially known as the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, one of the most highly trained counterterrorism units in the world. These operators had been pre-staged in the region for weeks, prepared to launch at a moment's notice. They loaded into 8 helicopters, a mix of Apache attack helicopters and CH-47 Chinook transport helicopters, at an undisclosed location inside Syria. The mission would require them to fly approximately 70 miles through hostile territory to reach the compound near Barisha. It was a dangerous journey. The helicopters would be flying low to avoid detection, passing over areas controlled by various armed groups, any of whom might open fire. To minimize the risk of international incidents or unintended clashes, American officials contacted Russian and Turkish military commanders ahead of time to inform them that U.S. aircraft would be operating in the area. The message was carefully worded to avoid revealing the specific target or location, but it ensured that Russian and Turkish forces would not interfere. Around midnight local time, the helicopters lifted off. Accompanying them was a massive aerial armada. Fighter jets, drones, surveillance aircraft, and aerial refueling tankers. It was a show of overwhelming American military power, designed to protect the raid force and eliminate any threats that emerged. As the helicopters approached the compound, the tension ratcheted up. They were flying into an area filled with armed militants from various factions, and within minutes, that danger became real. The helicopters started taking small arms fire from multiple locations. Armed fighters on the ground, likely members of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham or other local groups not affiliated with ISIS, opened fire on the American aircraft. They didn't know who was in the helicopters or why they were there, but they knew foreign military forces were in their territory, and they responded with gunfire. The response was swift and devastating. Apache helicopters and F-15 fighter jets circling overhead unleashed a barrage of covering fire. Video released later by the Pentagon showed aerial strikes hitting groups of fighters on the ground, some in vehicles, others on foot. Between 10 and 15 enemy combatants were killed in these strikes. The goal wasn't to fight a battle. It was to protect the raid force and ensure they could complete their mission without interference. As the helicopters touched down near the compound, Delta Force operators jumped out and moved quickly toward the target. They were accompanied by at least one military working dog, a Belgian Malinois with 4 years of experience and approximately 50 combat missions under his collar. The compound was a simple structure with high walls, typical of rural Syrian architecture. Intelligence had warned that the doors and windows might be booby-trapped, a common ISIS tactic. So instead of using the main entrance, the Delta operators did what special forces do best. They improvised. They blew holes in the compound walls with explosive charges and entered through the breaches. Inside, they encountered resistance. 6 ISIS members were killed during the assault, including 4 women and 1 man in addition to Baghdadi. Some were wearing suicide vests and refused to surrender. The operators moved methodically through the compound, clearing rooms, securing hostages, and searching for their primary target. They found 11 children inside, all of whom they safely escorted out of the building. These children, some of them Baghdadi's own, were removed from harm's way. But Baghdadi himself was nowhere to be seen in the main structure. Then they found the entrance to the tunnel. This was the escape route intelligence had warned them about, an underground passageway that led away from the compound. Baghdadi had fled down into the tunnel, hoping to escape. But the Americans had planned for this. They had the tunnel covered. There was no way out. Delta operators moved into the tunnel after him, and they sent the military dog ahead to pursue. In those final moments, cornered in a dead-end tunnel with no escape, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi made his last decision. He had brought 2 young children into the tunnel with him, both under the age of 12. And as American forces closed in, as the dog pursued him down the passageway, Baghdadi detonated a suicide vest that he was wearing. The explosion killed him instantly and murdered the 2 children he had taken with him. President Trump, watching the operation unfold in real time from the White House Situation Room alongside Vice President Pence, Defense Secretary Esper, General Milley, and other senior officials, would later describe Baghdadi as dying like a coward, taking innocent children to their deaths rather than face capture. At 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time on October 26, the Special Operations Force commander on the ground reported that Baghdadi had been killed. But the mission wasn't over. The operators needed to confirm his identity beyond any doubt. They collected DNA samples from the remains and ran them through field equipment that provided a rapid analysis. The DNA was compared to samples that had been collected years earlier when Baghdadi was detained at Camp Bucca in Iraq in 2004. The match was positive. It was him. The world's most wanted terrorist was dead. But the operators still had work to do. They spent approximately 2 hours inside the compound, collecting intelligence materials. They seized documents, electronics, and other items that could provide valuable information about ISIS operations, funding sources, and personnel. This intelligence harvest would prove crucial in continuing operations against the organization. Once the compound was cleared and all usable intelligence was collected, the final phase of the operation began. The United States military destroyed the entire compound with airstrikes. F-15 fighter jets and MQ-9 Reaper drones pummeled the site, reducing it to rubble. There were 2 reasons for this. First, to ensure that nothing of intelligence value was left behind for ISIS or other groups to recover. Second, and perhaps more importantly, to prevent the compound from becoming a shrine or pilgrimage site for Baghdadi's followers. The same consideration applied to Baghdadi's body. Following Islamic funeral rites, his remains were buried at sea, just as Osama bin Laden's had been in 2011. No grave, no memorial, no place for his supporters to venerate him. He would be erased from the earth as thoroughly as possible. The helicopters lifted off and flew back to their staging area. Mission accomplished. Every American operator returned safely. The only injury was to the military dog, who had been hurt by exposed electrical wires in the tunnel when Baghdadi detonated his vest. The dog recovered and was returned to duty. President Trump would later release a photo of the heroic canine, whose name remained classified for security reasons, calling him a beautiful dog and a talented dog. The entire operation, from wheels up to wheels down, had taken just a few hours. But it represented years of work by intelligence professionals, special operations forces, and allied partners. It was the culmination of an intelligence cycle that professionals call find, fix, finish. Find the target's location. Fix his position and verify his identity. Finish the mission by neutralizing the target. Every step had to be executed perfectly, and it was. On Sunday morning, October 27th, President Trump announced the results to the world. In a televised address from the White House, he provided an unusually detailed account of the operation, describing the helicopters, the gunfights, the tunnel chase, and Baghdadi's final moments. Trump said the terrorist leader had died like a dog, died like a coward, whimpering and crying and screaming as he fled from American forces. He thanked the intelligence professionals, the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines involved in the operation. He specifically thanked the Kurds for their crucial intelligence support, Iraqi forces for kicking off the investigation, and all the allied nations that had contributed to the fight against ISIS. The president said the world was now a much safer place, and that Baghdadi's death was a devastating blow to ISIS. General McKenzie held a press conference 3 days later, on October 30th, providing additional details and releasing video footage and photos from the raid. The grainy black and white images showed U.S. troops approaching the compound, helicopters striking enemy fighters, and before and after shots of the destroyed compound. McKenzie clarified some details, including that only 2 children had been killed by Baghdadi's suicide vest, not 3 as initially reported. He explained that Baghdadi had been at the compound for a considerable period, and that the operation had been exquisitely planned and executed in the finest tradition of the U.S. military. But he also issued a warning. Baghdadi's death was a significant blow to ISIS, but it would be a mistake to conclude that the terrorist organization had been defeated. ISIS still had thousands of fighters scattered across Iraq and Syria. The group would name a successor, Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Qurashi, within days of Baghdadi's death. Sleeper cells continued to operate. The ideology that drove ISIS hadn't died with its founder. The reactions from around the world poured in. Allied nations praised the operation. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman commended Trump and described the event as a turning point in the fight against extremism. The Prime Minister of Sri Lanka congratulated the president and said the operation made the world more secure. Syria's President Bashar al-Assad was characteristically dismissive, calling it a fantastic play staged by the Americans and questioning whether Baghdadi had really been killed. Russia initially expressed skepticism, noting this was far from the first report of Baghdadi's death, though they later acknowledged that if it happened, it was a significant achievement. The Kurds celebrated their role in the operation, with General Maslam tweeting that there had been 5 months of intelligence work on the ground leading to the successful elimination of the terrorist. Turkey stated they had been in intense coordination with U.S. forces. Iraq's defense ministry said their national intelligence service had helped pinpoint Baghdadi's hideout. It was a truly international effort, proof that when nations work together against a common enemy, extraordinary things can be accomplished. But the story of Operation Kayla Mueller is also a reminder of the human cost of terrorism and the long memories of those who fight it. Kayla Mueller was a young woman driven by compassion and a desire to help others. She worked with refugees, taught English to Tibetan exiles in India, volunteered in the West Bank, and traveled to the Syria-Turkey border to assist people fleeing the civil war. She was captured while leaving a Doctors Without Borders hospital in Aleppo in August 2013. For nearly 18 months she was held captive by ISIS, forced into marriage with Baghdadi, repeatedly raped and tortured. Fellow hostages who escaped reported her strength and compassion even in captivity. In February 2015, ISIS claimed she had been killed in a Jordanian airstrike. Her family confirmed her death, though the exact circumstances remained unclear. Years later, testimony from released captives revealed that Baghdadi himself had been her primary abuser and that she had been murdered either by him or someone in his organization. When General Mark Milley and other military leaders chose to name the operation after Kayla Mueller, it was a powerful statement. It said that America does not forget its citizens who are murdered by terrorists. It said that justice may be delayed, but it will come. It honored a young woman whose life was cut short by senseless violence, and whose story represents the best of American humanitarian spirit destroyed by the worst of human evil. Her parents, Carl and Marcia Mueller, had spent years advocating for stronger action against ISIS and for the rescue of hostages. When they learned that the operation to kill Baghdadi had been named for their daughter, it provided a measure of closure, a sense that Kayla's suffering had not been forgotten and that the man responsible for it had finally faced justice. In the months and years following Baghdadi's death, more details emerged. Investigators discovered that Baghdadi had been paying protection money to members of rival jihadist groups to hide him, at least $67,000 between early 2017 and mid-2018. Receipt books found by intelligence officials showed that ISIS had been smuggling fighters and paying off local commanders to create safe havens for its leaders. It became clear that Baghdadi's paranoia and security measures, while extensive, had not been perfect. He had been using internet service at the compound, paying about $8 a month in cash to a local provider under the username Mrab. These small digital footprints, combined with human intelligence, had allowed the CIA to track him down. There were also uncomfortable questions raised by investigative journalists. NPR conducted a multi-year investigation that challenged some of the U.S. military's claims about civilian casualties during the raid. Local residents and medical staff told NPR that non-combatant civilians had been killed and injured by U.S. helicopter fire during the assault, including people in a van who were targeted by airstrikes. The Pentagon initially rejected these claims, stating that troops had not harmed non-combatants. But after NPR's detailed reporting and the presentation of new evidence, the Pentagon announced it would reinvestigate. It was a reminder that even in successful military operations, the fog of war can lead to tragic outcomes, and that full transparency and accountability are essential. Matthew Mueller, Baghdadi's successor as ISIS leader, was himself killed in a U.S. raid in February 2022. Other high-ranking ISIS officials and members of Baghdadi's family were captured or killed in the years following Operation Kayla Mueller. The intelligence materials seized during the raid proved invaluable in continuing operations against the terrorist network. But as General McKenzie had warned, ISIS did not disappear. The group adapted, decentralized, and continued to operate in both Iraq and Syria. By 2025, intelligence assessments indicated that ISIS still had the capacity to inspire and direct attacks, to radicalize followers through online propaganda, and to exploit instability in the region. The war on terrorism, as President George W. Bush had warned after 9/11, was indeed a lengthy campaign unlike any other we had ever seen. Operation Kayla Mueller stands as one of the most significant counterterrorism operations in American history. It demonstrated the extraordinary capabilities of U.S. Special Operations Forces, the critical importance of intelligence cooperation between allied nations, and the determination to hunt down those who harm Americans no matter how long it takes. The raid required courage from the operators who flew into hostile territory and stormed a compound defended by armed terrorists. It required patience from intelligence professionals who spent years piecing together fragments of information until they had a complete picture. It required diplomacy to coordinate with foreign partners and navigate the complex political landscape of Syria. And it required leadership to make the tough decision to launch a high-risk operation with the lives of elite soldiers on the line. The men and women who planned and executed Operation Kayla Mueller will likely never receive public recognition. Most of their names will remain classified. The Delta Force operators who breached the walls and chased Baghdadi into that tunnel will return to their units and prepare for the next mission. The CIA officers who recruited sources and analyzed intelligence will continue their work in the shadows. The pilots who flew those helicopters through enemy fire will climb back into their cockpits. That's the nature of special operations and intelligence work. The victories are often secret. The heroes are anonymous. The work never ends. But we can know this. On the night of October 26, 2019, America kept its promise. Justice for Kayla Mueller, for James Foley, for Stephen Sotloff, for Peter Kassig, for the Jordanian pilot burned alive in a cage, for the Yazidi women and girls who were enslaved, for the Christians executed in Libya and Egypt, for the victims of Paris and Brussels and San Bernardino and Orlando, for every person who suffered at the hands of ISIS and its brutal founder. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi died alone in a dark tunnel, cornered like an animal, taking innocent children with him in a final act of cowardice. He died knowing that he had lost everything. His caliphate destroyed, his followers scattered, his life forfeit. His name destined to be remembered only as a symbol of evil defeated. The world became a safer place that night, not because terrorism was ended, but because one of its most dangerous champions was eliminated. If this story moved you, if it gave you a deeper appreciation for the men and women who protect us from threats we never see, then make sure to hit that subscribe button. The story of Operation Kayla Mueller is one of courage, justice, and the unwavering determination of free people to defend themselves against those who would destroy civilization itself. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is gone, but the fight he represents continues. And so does the vigilance, the sacrifice, and the extraordinary heroism of those who stand watch while we sleep, ready to fly into the darkness and face down evil wherever it hides. That's a story that deserves to be told, remembered, and honored.